The autumn rain fell like sheets of glass against the windows of Riverside Café, a tiny establishment tucked between towering buildings in lower Manhattan. The storm had arrived without warning, transforming the busy afternoon streets into rivers of rushing water that sent pedestrians scrambling for shelter. Inside the café, the air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the earthy scent of rain that clung to everyone who entered. Vincent Harrington sat in the corner booth, his fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug that had long gone cold. At 38 years old, he had mastered the art of appearing composed while feeling completely hollow inside. His charcoal gray sweater and dark jeans were deliberately casual, a stark contrast to the designer suits that filled his penthouse closet. This cafe was his secret escape, a place where nobody recognized him as the man whose face occasionally graced the business section of major newspapers. The woman who changed everything in an instant. The door burst open with a gust of wind, and Claire Bennett stumbled inside, completely drenched. Her scrubs clung to her frame, the cheerful pediatric patterns of teddy bears and rainbows now darkened by water. Her auburn hair hung in wet strands around her face, and her green eyes were wide with the exhaustion that came from a double shift at Metro General Hospital. She clutched a canvas bag against her chest, trying to protect the medical journals inside from further damage. Claire scanned the crowded cafe desperately, searching for any available seat. Every table was occupied by people who had also fled the storm. Her shoulders sagged with defeat until her eyes landed on the corner booth where Vincent sat alone. Without overthinking it, she made her way toward him, leaving a trail of water droplets across the wooden floor. "Excuse me," Claire said, her voice soft but steady despite her obvious discomfort. "Would you mind if I sat here? I promise I will try not to flood your table." Vincent looked up, and the moment their eyes met, something inside his chest tightened in a way that was both painful and exhilarating. Her face held traces of fatigue, but there was a warmth in her expression that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. He gestured to the empty seat across from him, managing a small smile that felt more genuine than any he had worn in months. Finding truth in unexpected conversation. "Thank you so much," Claire said as she slid into the booth, setting her bag carefully on the seat beside her. She used paper napkins from the dispenser to dab at her face and arms, but it was a futile effort against the amount of water that had soaked through her clothing. "Rough day?" Vincent asked, surprised by his own willingness to engage in conversation with a stranger. Claire let out a laugh that held no humor. "Rough does not even begin to cover it. I just finished 14 hours at the hospital, lost my umbrella somewhere between the subway and here, and my apartment is still another 20 blocks away." Vincent found himself leaning forward slightly. "What do you do at the hospital?" "I am a pediatric nurse," Claire replied, her expression softening. "I work with children who are fighting serious illnesses. Today we had a little boy, only 6 years old, who finally got to ring the bell signaling the end of his cancer treatment. But we also had a teenager admitted with complications that could have been prevented if her family could afford regular checkups." The way Claire spoke carried the weight of someone who genuinely cared, who carried the pain of others as if it were her own. Vincent was accustomed to people who measured success in profits and power, but this woman measured hers in lives touched and moments of hope created. The touch that sparked everything. "That must be incredibly hard," Vincent said quietly. "Caring that much about people you barely know." Claire met his gaze directly. "It is hard, but what is the alternative? Going through life without connecting with anyone? That seems even harder." Her words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread through Vincent's carefully constructed walls. He realized with sudden clarity that this was exactly what he had been doing for years. Building an empire of steel and glass while his own heart remained empty and disconnected. The waitress appeared to take Claire's order, and Vincent noticed how she chose the least expensive item on the menu, a simple black coffee. When the waitress walked away, Vincent caught Claire trying to hide a shiver as the café's air conditioning made her wet clothes feel even colder. Without thinking, Vincent reached across the table and gently placed his hand over hers. The touch was brief but sent electricity coursing through both of them. Claire's eyes widened in surprise, but she did not pull away. "You are freezing," Vincent said, though the concern in his voice went deeper than just the temperature. "Let me order you something hot to eat. Please." Claire hesitated, her independent nature warring with her current exhaustion and hunger. Something about the genuine concern in this stranger's eyes made her defenses crumble. "Only if you tell me your name first." "Vincent," he said, his thumb unconsciously brushing against her knuckles before he reluctantly pulled his hand back. "Vincent Harrington." "Claire Bennett," she replied, offering him a smile that made his heart skip. And yes, something hot to eat sounds perfect. Conversations that revealed hidden hearts. As the storm continued to rage outside, Vincent and Claire fell into conversation that flowed with surprising ease. He asked about her work, and she shared stories that made him laugh for the first time in weeks. She told him about Mrs. Patterson, an elderly patient who kept sneaking cookies to the children despite doctor's orders, and about little Tommy who insisted on bringing his pet turtle to every appointment for moral support. In turn, Claire asked Vincent about his life, and he found himself being more honest than he had been with anyone in years. He talked about feeling disconnected despite being surrounded by people, about building things that lasted but relationships that crumbled, about success that felt increasingly hollow. "That sounds lonely," Claire said gently, her green eyes filled with understanding rather than pity. "It is," Vincent admitted, the vulnerability in his voice surprising even himself. "I have everything I thought I wanted, but somewhere along the way, I forgot what actually matters." Claire reached across the table this time, her hand finding his. "Maybe what matters is sitting right here in this moment. Two people having an honest conversation without pretending to be anything other than who they really are." Vincent looked down at their joined hands, then back up at her face, and felt something shift fundamentally inside him. This woman, soaked and exhausted from caring for others, somehow saw through all his carefully maintained facades to the person underneath. The promise of something more. As the rain finally began to ease, neither Vincent nor Claire made any move to leave. They sat together as the café gradually emptied, their conversation deepening with each passing moment. Vincent learned that Claire had grown up in a small town, had put herself through nursing school, and sent money home to help her younger siblings. Claire discovered that Vincent loved old architecture, collected vintage books, and visited this particular café because it reminded him of simpler times. When the waitress gently informed them that the café would be closing soon, Vincent felt a surge of panic at the thought of this encounter ending. He pulled out his phone with slightly trembling hands. "Can I see you again?" he asked, his voice carrying a hopefulness he had not felt in years. "I know this might seem sudden, but I have not connected with anyone like this in longer than I can remember." Claire studied his face for a long moment, seeing the sincerity in his blue-gray eyes. Every practical part of her brain said she should be cautious, should protect herself. But something deeper, something she had almost stopped believing in, told her that this moment mattered. "Yes," Claire said simply, taking his phone and entering her number. "I would really like that." As they finally stood to leave, Vincent helped Claire with her still damp bag, his hand lingering on her shoulder. The touch was innocent but charged with unspoken promise. They walked to the door together, and when they stepped outside into the clean, rain-washed air, the city seemed brighter somehow, full of possibility. Vincent watched as Claire hailed a cab, and just before she got in, she turned back and gave him a smile that made him believe, for the first time in years, that maybe he could feel something real again. As the taxi pulled away, he stood on the wet sidewalk, already counting the hours until he could see her again, already knowing that this chance encounter had changed something essential inside him. The rain had stopped, but Vincent barely noticed. He was too busy replaying every moment of their conversation, the sound of her laugh, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she had looked at him as if he mattered not for what he owned, but for who he was underneath it all. 3 days passed before Vincent gathered the courage to send the first text message. He had drafted and deleted at least 20 versions, each one feeling either too eager or too distant. Finally, he settled on something simple. Coffee tomorrow? Same place, same time. Vincent. He pressed send before he could second-guess himself again, then spent the next hour staring at his phone like a teenager waiting for a response. Claire was in the middle of changing bandages for a young patient when her phone buzzed. She waited until her break to check it, and when she saw Vincent's name on the screen, her heart did a small flip that both delighted and terrified her. She had thought about him constantly since their encounter, wondering if she had imagined the connection between them. His message proved she had not. "I will be there," she typed back, adding a simple smiley face before she could overthink it. The cafe became their sacred space. The next afternoon, Claire arrived at Riverside Café 5 minutes early, her heart racing with anticipation. She had changed out of her scrubs into a simple blue dress and had actually taken time with her hair, letting it fall in soft waves around her shoulders. When Vincent walked through the door precisely at 3 o'clock, his face lit up in a way that made her feel beautiful despite her simple outfit. Vincent had also dressed carefully, choosing a soft gray Henley and jeans that made him look approachable rather than intimidating. He crossed the cafe in quick strides, and when he reached Claire, he did something that surprised both of them. Instead of sitting down immediately, he pulled her into a gentle hug that lasted just long enough to feel significant. "I am really glad you came," Vincent said softly, his voice close to her ear. "I am glad you asked," Claire replied, breathing in the clean, woody scent of him. They settled into the same corner booth, and this time when their knees touched under the table, neither of them pulled away. The conversation picked up exactly where it had left off 3 days earlier, as if no time had passed at all. Vincent asked about her week, and Claire told him about the 7-year-old girl who had drawn her a picture of them dancing together, insisting that Claire needed to find her prince. "She sounds wise beyond her years," Vincent said with a smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. "She told me that princes do not always wear crowns," Claire replied, looking directly at him. "Sometimes they just wear kind hearts." Vincent felt something warm spread through his chest at her words. This would have been the perfect moment to tell her the truth about who he really was, about the penthouse overlooking Central Park, about the company that bore his name on buildings throughout the city. But the fear of watching her expression change, of seeing her treat him differently, kept the words locked inside. Discovering each other's hidden worlds. Their afternoon coffee meetings became a regular ritual. 3 times a week, sometimes 4, they would meet at Riverside Café and lose themselves in conversation that ranged from profound to playful. Vincent learned that Claire volunteered at a free clinic on her days off, that she had a weakness for old black and white movies, and that she sang off-key in the shower without caring who heard. Claire discovered that Vincent had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, that he had once wanted to be an architect before life took him in a different direction, and that he noticed small details about everything around him. He remembered how she took her coffee, that she always tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was thinking, and that her eyes turned a deeper green when she talked about the children she cared for. One Saturday, Vincent suggested they venture beyond the cafe. "There is a place I want to show you," he said, a hint of mystery in his voice. "If you trust me enough to let me surprise you." Claire found herself nodding without hesitation, something that would have shocked her cautious nature if she had stopped to think about it. "I trust you," she said simply, and meant it completely. Vincent led her through streets she had walked 100 times but had never really seen. He showed her a hidden garden tucked between buildings in Chelsea, a place where roses climbed ancient brick walls and a small fountain whispered secrets to anyone willing to listen. They sat on a weathered bench while Vincent told her about discovering this place during his darkest period, when success had felt like a prison. "I used to come here and imagine a different life," Vincent admitted, his shoulder pressed against hers. "One where things mattered more than money, where connections were real instead of transactional." Claire took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "What stopped you from living that life?" Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Fear, I suppose. Fear of disappointing people, of admitting that everything I had built felt empty, of being vulnerable enough to let someone truly see me. I see you, Claire said softly, turning to face him. And what I see is someone brave enough to admit when something is missing, someone willing to search for more. The way she looked at him in that moment, with complete acceptance and understanding, made Vincent's throat tight with emotion. He lifted his free hand to her face, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheek. Time seemed to slow as they leaned toward each other, the world narrowing to just the two of them. The kiss that changed everything. Their first kiss was soft and tentative, a question asked and answered without words. Vincent's lips touched Claire's with a gentleness that made her breath catch, and when she responded by pressing closer, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of longing and recognition. His hand moved to the back of her neck while hers clutched the front of his shirt, both of them trying to get closer despite already being intertwined. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing heavily. Vincent rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as he tried to memorize every sensation, every emotion flooding through him. I have been wanting to do that since the moment I first saw you, he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. Then why did you wait so long? Claire asked, a smile playing at her lips. Because I knew that once I kissed you, everything would change, Vincent replied, opening his eyes to meet hers. And I wanted to be absolutely certain I was ready for that. Claire understood exactly what he meant. This was not just attraction or infatuation. This was the beginning of something that could fundamentally alter the course of their lives. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. Learning the language of each other's hearts. The weeks that followed their first kiss were filled with a deepening intimacy that went far beyond the physical, though the attraction between them grew stronger with each meeting. Vincent began showing Claire his favorite parts of the city, the places that meant something to him personally rather than professionally. He took her to a small bookstore in the village where the owner knew him by name and set aside first editions he thought Vincent would appreciate. Claire noticed that Vincent never used a credit card in her presence, always paying with cash. She noticed that he never talked about his work in specific terms, always keeping things vague. These small observations gathered in the back of her mind, not quite concerns but questions that had no answers. In return, Claire brought Vincent into her world with an openness that left him awed. She took him to the community center where she taught CPR classes to teenagers, to the soup kitchen where she served meals every other Sunday, to the park where neighborhood children gathered to play, and she always seemed to know every single one by name. Vincent watched as Claire interacted with people from all walks of life with the same genuine warmth and respect. She treated the homeless veteran asking for change with the same dignity she showed everyone else. She listened to the elderly woman at the bus stop tell the same story for the third time with patient interest. She was real in a way that made Vincent acutely aware of how much of his own life had become performance. One evening, as they walked along the waterfront watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, Claire asked him the question he had been dreading. "Vincent, why do I feel like there are parts of yourself you are keeping hidden from me?" He stopped walking, his hand tightening around hers. "What makes you think that?" "Little things," Claire said, turning to face him. "The way you deflect when I ask about your work. How you always suggest places to meet rather than ever inviting me to your home. The careful way you talk about your life, as if you are editing as you go." Vincent felt panic rise in his chest. This was the moment he had been avoiding, the crossroads where honesty and fear collided. He wanted desperately to tell her everything, but the image of her face changing when she learned the truth, of her seeing him as just another wealthy man rather than the person he was with her, made the words stick in his throat. "I am not hiding anything important," he lied, and hated himself for it. "I just like keeping some parts of my life private." "Is that so wrong?" Claire studied his face for a long moment, and he could see her trying to decide whether to push or to let it go. Finally, she squeezed his hand and offered a small smile. "No, it is not wrong. Everyone deserves privacy. I just want you to know that whatever you are protecting, whatever you think might change things between us, I am stronger than you might believe." Vincent pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. "You are the strongest person I have ever met," he murmured into her hair. And that terrifies me because I do not want to lose you. Then do not give me a reason to leave, Claire said simply, her arms wrapped around his waist. Building a foundation on borrowed time. Despite the shadow of his secret, Vincent and Claire continued to grow closer. They developed their own language of inside jokes and meaningful glances. Vincent learned that when Claire was stressed, she needed space before she needed comfort. Claire learned that Vincent's quiet moments were not coldness but deep thinking, and that sometimes he just needed her presence without conversation. They began staying at Claire's small apartment, a modest studio in Brooklyn that cost less than Vincent spent on ties in a month. But within those walls, surrounded by Claire's second-hand furniture and walls covered with children's artwork from her patients, Vincent felt more at home than he ever had in his luxury penthouse. Claire would fall asleep in his arms after long shifts, her breathing evening out as exhaustion claimed her. Vincent would lie awake, stroking her hair and wrestling with his conscience. Every day that passed without telling her the truth felt like another brick in a wall that would eventually come between them. But every day that passed also made him more afraid of losing what they had built. One morning, Claire woke to find Vincent already awake, watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "What are you thinking about?" she asked sleepily, reaching up to touch his face. "I am thinking about how you have completely undone me," Vincent said honestly. "How I did not know it was possible to feel this much for another person. How the thought of anything coming between us makes me physically ache." Claire propped herself up on her elbow, her expression serious. "Vincent, nothing has to come between us unless we let it. Whatever secrets you are keeping, whatever walls you have built, they do not have to separate us if you choose to let me in." It was another opportunity, another chance to tell her everything. But the fear was still there, stronger than his courage. "I know," he said, pulling her down for a kiss that was meant to distract them both. "I know." As Claire melted into the kiss, neither of them noticed the newspaper that had been delivered to her building that morning, waiting just outside her door. On its front page was a business section article about the upcoming charity gala hosted by Harrington Development Corporation, complete with a large photo of Vincent in a tuxedo, identified as the billionaire owner and CEO. The truth was about to catch up with them, and neither was prepared for the storm it would bring. Claire hummed softly as she made coffee in her tiny kitchen, still wearing Vincent's shirt from the night before. He had left early for a meeting he could not cancel, kissing her forehead and promising to return that evening with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant. She felt lighter than she had in years, as if loving Vincent had unlocked something joyful inside her that she had forgotten existed. She opened her apartment door to grab the newspaper, something she rarely bothered with anymore. But her neighbor Mrs. Chen had mentioned an article about healthcare workers that Claire wanted to read. She bent down, picked up the paper, and froze completely when her eyes landed on the front page of the business section. The photograph was unmistakable. Vincent stood in an elegant ballroom wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than her monthly rent, shaking hands with the mayor. But it was the headline that made her knees weak. Billionaire developer Vincent Harrington announces $50 million expansion, real estate mogul plans to transform Manhattan's skyline once again. Claire read the article 3 times, each word feeling like a small betrayal. Vincent Harrington, CEO of Harrington Development Corporation, one of the wealthiest men in New York, owner of half the luxury buildings in Manhattan. The man who had sat in her modest apartment, who had paid for their simple meals with crumpled bills, who had told her he worked in real estate as if he sold apartments rather than owned entire buildings. Her hands trembled as she set down the newspaper. The coffee she had been making suddenly smelled bitter and wrong. Everything felt wrong. How could she have been so blind? The expensive watch he sometimes forgot to take off, the way people occasionally stared at him on the street, the careful vagueness about his work. It all made terrible sense now. The confrontation that shattered everything. Claire did not call or text. She simply waited, her anger and hurt building with each passing hour. When Vincent arrived that evening carrying bags of Thai food and wearing a smile that used to make her heart soar, she was ready. "Claire," he said warmly, setting down the food and moving to embrace her. I missed you today. She stepped back, and he froze at the coldness in her movement. His eyes found the newspaper spread open on her small kitchen table, and all the color drained from his face. Claire, I can explain, he started, but she held up her hand to stop him. Vincent Harrington, she said, her voice shaking with controlled emotion. Billionaire real estate developer. Owner of Harrington Development Corporation. That is who you are, right? Not just some guy who works in real estate. Vincent felt his world tilting. Yes, but please let me explain why I did not tell you. Why you lied to me, you mean, Claire corrected, her green eyes blazing with hurt and anger. 4 weeks, Vincent. Weeks of me sharing everything about my life, my struggles with student loans, my tiny apartment, my second-hand furniture, while you sat there pretending to be something you are not. I never pretended, Vincent said desperately, taking a step toward her. Everything between us was real. I just did not tell you about my business because I wanted you to see me, not my bank account. Claire laughed, but it was a broken sound. You do not get to decide what information I need to make choices about my own life. You do not get to lie by omission and call it protection. I shared everything with you, Vincent. Everything. And you could not trust me enough to be honest. The truth behind the deception. Vincent ran his hands through his hair, desperation making his movements jerky and uncoordinated. You want to know why I did not tell you? Because every single relationship I have ever had has been poisoned by money. People see the wealth before they see me. They want something, or they change how they act, or they start treating me like a prize to be won instead of a person. So you decided to take away my choice, Claire said, her voice rising. You decided that I was too shallow, too weak, too something to handle the truth. You made that decision for me, Vincent. That is not fair, Vincent protested, his own anger beginning to surface. I fell in love with you in that cafe because you treated me like a human being. You did not care about impressing me or what I could do for you. You were real, Claire. The only real thing in my life. And I was terrified that if you knew the truth, everything would change. Everything has changed, Claire said, tears now streaming down her face. But not because of your money. Because you lied to me. Because you thought so little of me that you could not trust me with the truth. Because while I was falling in love with who I thought you were playing some kind of game. It was not a game, Vincent said, his voice breaking. This is the most real thing that has ever happened to me. You are the most real thing. Please, Claire, do not let this destroy us. Claire wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the apartment. I need you to leave. I need time to think, to process this. I cannot look at you right now without wondering what else you have hidden from me. The darkness that followed. Vincent stood frozen for a long moment, searching her face for any softness, any opening. When he found none, he nodded slowly. I will go. But Claire, please believe me when I say that everything I told you about how I feel, about who I am when I am with you, that was all true. The money does not define me. Maybe not, Claire said quietly, opening the door for him. But the lies do. After Vincent left, Claire sank to the floor and let herself fall apart completely. The man she had fallen in love with felt like a stranger now. How much of what they shared had been real? Had he laughed at her modest apartment, her careful budgeting, her excitement over small pleasures that meant nothing to someone with his wealth? Vincent returned to his penthouse for the first time in weeks, and the expansive space felt like a tomb. The floor-to-ceiling windows offering million-dollar views, the imported marble, the custom furniture, all of it felt meaningless without Claire. He poured himself a drink he did not want and stood at the window watching the city lights blur through tears he had not shed in decades. The reflection that changed everything. 3 days passed in miserable silence. Vincent threw himself into work, attending meetings and signing contracts, but his assistant noticed he seemed to be going through the motions like a man sleepwalking through his own life. Claire picked up extra shifts at the hospital, trying to exhaust herself enough that she could not think about Vincent, but his absence was a constant ache in her chest. It was Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor, who finally made Claire pause. The older woman knocked on her door on the third evening, carrying a container of homemade soup. "You look terrible, dear," Mrs. Chen said bluntly, pushing her way inside. "Man trouble?" Claire found herself telling the whole story to her neighbor, every detail spilling out in a rush of words. When she finished, Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "So this man, he has money. Lots of it. And he was afraid you would treat him differently if you knew. Was he right to be afraid?" "What?" Claire asked, startled by the question. "Would you have treated him differently if you had known from the beginning?" Mrs. Chen pressed. "Would you have been comfortable sharing your tiny apartment, your simple meals, your ordinary life? Or would you have felt self-conscious, maybe a little inadequate?" Claire opened her mouth to deny it, then closed it again. The honest answer was that yes, she probably would have felt different. She would have been more guarded, more aware of the gap between their lives. She might never have felt comfortable enough to truly be herself. "That does not make the lying okay," Claire said, but her voice carried less certainty now. "No, it does not," Mrs. Chen agreed. "But it makes it human. He made a mistake because he was afraid of losing something precious. The question is the man you fell in love with still there underneath the money? Or was it all just an act?" The risk of radical honesty. That night, Claire pulled out her phone and stared at Vincent's number for a long time before finally typing a message. "We need to talk. Really talk. No more walls, no more secrets. If you are willing to be completely honest with me, I am willing to listen." The response came within seconds, as if he had been waiting by his phone. "Anytime, anywhere. I will tell you everything. Please give me this chance." They agreed to meet at the Hidden Garden in Chelsea, the place where they had first kissed. When Claire arrived, she found Vincent already there, sitting on the same bench. He looked exhausted, his eyes shadowed, his normally impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. When he saw her, he stood up so quickly he almost stumbled. "Thank you for coming," Vincent said, his voice raw with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a chance to explain everything." Claire sat down on the bench, and after a moment of hesitation, Vincent sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. The distance felt wrong to both of them, but necessary. "Tell me everything," Claire said quietly. "And I mean everything. Who you really are, why you built those walls, what you were afraid of. I need to understand." Vincent took a deep breath and began to talk. He told her about growing up wealthy but lonely, about parents who showed love through money rather than presents. He described his early relationships that had crumbled when women became more interested in his portfolio than his person. He explained the succession of friendships that revealed themselves as networking opportunities, the sense of isolation that grew with each floor his buildings climbed higher. "By the time I met you," Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion, "I had convinced myself that genuine connection was impossible for someone like me. That I would spend my life surrounded by people who wanted something from me but never really saw me. And then you walked into that cafe, soaking wet and exhausted, and you looked at me like I was just a person. Not a means to an end, not a status symbol, just another human being sharing space during a storm. The courage to be vulnerable." Claire listened without interruption, watching the play of emotions across his face. She could see the truth in his words, the genuine pain in his eyes. But she also needed him to understand the impact of his choices. "I hear you," Claire said when he finished. "I understand your fear, and I am sorry that people have treated you that way. But Vincent, your fear does not excuse taking away my agency. I deserve to make an informed choice about whether to be in a relationship with you." You decided that I was not strong enough, not trustworthy enough to handle the truth. You are right, Vincent said immediately. You are absolutely right, and there is no excuse for that. I was a coward, Claire. I told myself I was protecting what we had, but really I was protecting myself. I was so terrified of seeing your expression change when you found out, of watching you start to treat me differently, that I chose deception over trust. And that was wrong. Tears were streaming down both their faces now. Claire reached over and took his hand, the first physical contact they had shared since she had asked him to leave. Vincent gripped her hand like a lifeline. I need to know, Claire said, her voice shaking. When you were with me in my tiny apartment, eating cheap takeout, walking through ordinary neighborhoods, were you secretly judging me? Were you laughing at how little I have compared to you? Vincent turned to face her fully, both hands now holding hers. Claire, those were the happiest moments of my life. Your apartment felt more like home than my penthouse ever has. The simple meals we shared meant more than any five-star restaurant. Walking through the city with you, seeing it through your eyes, reminded me of why I fell in love with architecture in the first place. You did not show me poverty, you showed me richness. Real richness. The kind that has nothing to do with money. The beginning of healing. They sat in silence for a long time, hands clasped, both of them trying to find their way back to each other across the chasm that deception had created. Finally, Claire spoke again. If we are going to try to fix this, everything has to be different. Complete honesty, even when it is hard. Especially when it is hard. I need to see your real life, all of it, and you need to trust me enough to show it to me. I want that, Vincent said immediately. I want you to see everything. The penthouse, the office, the parts of my life I kept hidden. And I want to keep being part of your world too. The hospital, the community center, the soup kitchen. I do not want to lose that. It is going to be complicated, Claire warned. Your world and mine are very different. There will be times when that gap feels impossible to bridge. Then we will build a bridge, Vincent said with quiet determination. Together. I am not asking you to become part of my world, Claire. I am asking if we can create a new world that belongs to both of us. Claire studied his face for a long moment, searching for any hint of insincerity. What she found instead was a man who was genuinely terrified of losing her, who was willing to tear down all his protective walls if it meant a chance at real connection. She thought about the past few days without him, the hollow ache that nothing could fill, the way even her beloved work felt dimmer without him to share it with. I am still angry, Claire said honestly. And it is going to take time for me to fully trust you again. But I do not want to lose you either, Vincent. What we have, it is worth fighting for. Vincent pulled her into his arms, and Claire let herself melt into his embrace. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body shaking with relief and emotion. I will spend every day proving to you that your trust is not misplaced. I will be so honest it will probably be uncomfortable sometimes. No more walls, Claire. I promise. The transformation of two worlds. The following weeks were a journey of radical honesty and vulnerability. Vincent invited Claire to his penthouse, and she walked through the expansive space with wide eyes, trying to reconcile this luxury with the man she knew. But when Vincent showed her the one room he had kept exactly as he wanted it, a small study filled with architectural books and sketches, she saw him there. The real him. In turn, Vincent spent more time in Claire's world. He joined her at the soup kitchen, serving meals and listening to stories from people whose struggles he had never truly understood. He attended her CPR classes at the community center, watching as she patiently taught teenagers skills that could save lives. He began to see wealth and poverty not as abstract concepts but as lived realities that shaped everything. One evening, as they walked through the city after volunteering together, Vincent stopped suddenly. I want to start a foundation, he said. One that funds free clinics and provides scholarships for nursing students. I want to use the resources I have to support the kind of work you do. Claire looked at him, seeing the genuine passion in his eyes. Not because of me, though. It has to be because you believe in it. It is because of you, Vincent admitted. But not the way you think. You opened my eyes to what actually matters, Claire. You showed me that real wealth is measured in lives touched and moments of compassion. I want to build something that reflects that truth. Claire rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, a kiss that spoke of forgiveness and new beginnings. Then let us build it together. 6 months later, Claire stood in the garden where they had first kissed and later had their painful conversation about truth and trust. Vincent had brought her there again, claiming he wanted to show her how the spring flowers had transformed the space. But when they rounded the corner, Claire gasped. The garden was filled with photographs, dozens of them hanging from ribbons tied to the trees and bushes. Pictures of them together at the café, walking through the city, volunteering at the soup kitchen, laughing over cheap takeout in her apartment, dressed up at a charity gala for the foundation they had launched together. Each photograph captured a moment of genuine connection, of two people learning to navigate their different worlds by creating a new one together. In the center of it all, Vincent stood waiting, his eyes full of love and nervousness. "Claire Bennett," he said as she approached, her hands covering her mouth in shock. "You taught me that real wealth has nothing to do with money. That true connection requires vulnerability. That love is not about what you can provide but who you can be when all the masks fall away." He got down on one knee, pulling out a simple ring that was beautiful in its elegance without being ostentatious. "I want to spend my life building a world with you. Not my world or your world, but ours. Will you marry me?" Claire could barely see him through her tears, but she nodded vigorously. "Yes. Yes, absolutely yes." As Vincent slipped the ring on her finger and stood to kiss her, Claire realized that the story that had begun with deception had transformed into something true and beautiful. They had both been broken in different ways, both been afraid of connection, both been searching for something real in a world that often felt fake. The rain that had brought them together had washed away their pretenses, leaving only the truth of two people willing to be vulnerable enough to truly see each other. And in that seeing, in that radical honesty and acceptance, they had found something neither had believed possible anymore. They had found a love that transcended money and status, a love built on truth and trust, a love that proved the most valuable things in life could never be purchased. They had found each other, and in doing so, they had both found themselves. As the sun set over the garden, painting everything in shades of gold and rose, Vincent and Claire held each other close, both of them knowing that their journey was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, moments when their different backgrounds would create friction, times when old fears would resurface. But they would face it all together, with honesty as their foundation and love as their guide. The millionaire and the nurse, the penthouse and the studio apartment, the business empire and the community center. All of it was part of their story now, woven together into something beautiful and unique. And somewhere in a small cafe in Manhattan, where two lonely souls had first found each other during a storm, their corner booth waited for them, a reminder that the greatest treasures are often found in the most unexpected places. The end.